It was one of those towns where time seemed to have stopped. Small, isolated, and marked by decades of neglect, its empty streets and dusty buildings told stories of a distant past. In the center of this place stood the deepest scar in its history, a hospital now in ruins, which for years had been a pillar of hope for the residents. Yet, something dark and inexplicable surrounded it. What had happened there to transform it into the symbol of fear that now dominated the town? The few people who still lived there didn't talk about the hospital, at least not openly. There was an uncomfortable silence around it, almost as if mentioning its name might awaken something they preferred to forget. Some of the older residents said the hospital had once been a site of advanced medical practices for its time, but over the years it had become the stage for events that no one dared to investigate thoroughly. Strange disappearances, mysterious deaths, and the vanishing of doctors were just part of the folklore surrounding the hospital. But what made it truly terrifying wasn't what was said about it, but rather the feeling one got when approaching it. The wind that blew through its broken windows carried whispers that made the curious turn back before taking the first step inside. Who would dare enter such a place, and why? The answers seemed to be inside, waiting for those who had the courage to face their worst fears. The small town had many secrets, but none were as deeply rooted as the rumors surrounding the abandoned hospital. The stories varied depending on who told them, but the general consensus was always the same. That place was never normal. Tales spoke of experimental medical practices, surgeries without anesthesia, and patients who never had a chance to leave alive. There was a current of fear that spanned generations, a fear that grew with each new account from someone who dared to pass near that ominous building. Some said that the hospital's director, a cold and calculating man, conducted illegal experiments on the patients, seeking to understand the limits of the human mind. He mysteriously disappeared along with his staff, and since then, the hospital had been forever marked by screams that still echoed through its empty corridors. The local residents avoided the place, and those who passed nearby at night swore they could hear the agonizing cries, said to belong to souls that never found peace. These rumors, combined with the mystery of the deaths and disappearances, attracted ghost hunters, curious individuals, and urban explorers, all searching for answers or a supernatural experience. However, each time someone tried to uncover what really happened in that hospital, fear seemed to be the only constant companion. But there was something more than just simple legends. Something in that building wanted to remain hidden, and many believed that any attempt to unearth its secrets would bring terrible consequences. Over the years, many urban explorers decided to challenge the unknown and venture into the abandoned hospital. The allure of mystery and the supernatural was irresistible to these thrill seekers. Each entered with a mixture of bravery and excitement, but what they found inside was something none of them were prepared for. The first reports that surfaced were disturbing: shadows that moved on their own, doors slamming without wind, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls. For some, it was just another adventure, but for others, the experiences left permanent scars. One group of friends, known for exploring abandoned locations, decided to document their entry into the hospital with cameras and microphones. They hoped to capture evidence of what they had heard for years. However, what they recorded was more terrifying than anyone could have predicted. Voices were captured that didn't belong to anyone in the group. Spectral figures appeared in their footage, and there was a growing sensation that they were being watched. Some of them, to this day, refused to speak about that night. As more people attempted to enter the hospital, the reports became more consistent. It was as if the building were alive, reacting to the presence of anyone daring enough to cross its threshold. Some fled in panic after just a few minutes inside, while others were never seen again. Something, or someone, inside that hospital was determined to protect its secrets, and every new explorer only seemed to strengthen the dark force that inhabited the place. The first time a group of urban explorers reported encountering something beyond physical phenomena, the details were, at the very least, disturbing. They entered the hospital armed with flashlights, cameras, and a youthful bravado that wouldn't last long. They had barely crossed the main hallway when the temperature dropped abruptly. Despite it being a warm summer night, a chilling sensation enveloped them. One member of the group described the feeling of being watched from all angles, as if hundreds of invisible eyes were following their every move. The screams started out of nowhere. At first, they were low, almost inaudible, like whispers lost in the wind. Then they grew louder and more desperate, filling the corridors with an agony none of them would ever forget. The voices seemed to draw nearer, then retreat, never revealing their source. When the group tried to turn back, a translucent figure appeared at the end of one of the hallways. There was no doubt they were in the presence of something that did not belong to the world of the living. A restless, enraged spirit blocked their path. Those who managed to escape the hospital swore that the spirit had followed them to the exit. They felt invisible fingers brush against their shoulders, unsettling whispers in their ears, and a cold that clung to them for hours afterward. This first encounter marked the beginning of a long series of reports about restless spirits wandering the hospital's halls. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. Something even more sinister was lurking, waiting for its moment to emerge. As time went on, reports of encounters with spirits in the hospital began to include something even more unsettling: an entity. Unlike the wandering spirits, this presence was malevolent and purposeful, seemingly with a single objective: to protect the hospital and the secrets it harbored. Those who witnessed the entity described it as a dense shadow, moving quickly and fluidly through the corridors, always lurking, always watching. But unlike the spirits, this entity didn't just watch, it attacked. One explorer, known for his frequent visits to haunted locations, recounted his encounter with the entity in terror. He and his companions felt an oppressive presence as soon as they entered one of the old operating rooms. Out of nowhere, a thick shadow, as if the air itself had solidified, took shape before them. It moved slowly but with clear intent. The screams of his companions echoed through the hospital as they tried to flee, but the entity seemed to toy with them, allowing them to run only to circle back and trap them again. Those who escaped unharmed that day told a story that further fueled the legends surrounding the hospital. According to them, the vengeful entity wasn't just a disturbed spirit, it was the embodiment of something or someone determined to keep the past buried. Perhaps a doctor who refused to let his horrific practices be revealed, or maybe something even worse. One thing was certain: the vengeful entity didn't let anyone leave without paying a price. Before it became the nightmare we know today, the hospital was a respected institution. But something was terribly wrong with what occurred behind the closed doors of its most isolated wards. Townspeople whispered about the doctors who worked there, men and women who had no qualms about pushing the boundaries of medicine. What began as a place of hope and healing quickly transformed into a site of cruel experiments where ethical lines were frequently crossed. Vulnerable patients, especially those without families or resources, became the primary targets of these experiments. Painful treatments, invasive procedures, and experimental techniques were carried out without proper consent. An alarming number of patients simply vanished without explanation. What started as murmurs among the nurses soon spread through the town, and suspicions that something terrible was happening began to take shape. But whenever a family member questioned the hospital about the whereabouts of a patient, they received vague responses or no answer at all. The darkest reports spoke of a special ward, accessible only to a few trusted doctors. It was in this ward that the most horrific practices occurred, procedures that defied human understanding. Some of the survivors who managed to leave the hospital recounted the terror of waking up in the middle of surgeries, the suffering of being treated as test subjects, and the atrocities they witnessed. No one knew exactly how far these doctors went in their pursuit of knowledge, but what happened within those walls was more than enough to stain the reputation of the entire town. Among the darkest legends surrounding the hospital are the stories of the patients who were never seen again after crossing its doors. Many of these patients were forgotten by society, without family, friends, or anyone to ask questions. They were vulnerable individuals seeking the hospital as a last hope for healing, but what they found was far worse. Their records mysteriously disappeared, Their beds were left empty overnight, and the hospital refused to offer any plausible explanation about what had happened. The town began to notice a pattern. All those who went missing were patients with conditions that inspired fear or disdain. People with mental illnesses, degenerative diseases, or chronic conditions were, in reality, treated as subjects in grotesque experiments. At times, it seemed as though the hospital decided who would leave and who would stay, but those who stayed were never seen again. Some locals still whisper in conspiratorial tones that the bodies of these patients never left the building. They were buried in the basements, hidden in the walls, or perhaps locked away in secret chambers deep within the hospital. The rare accounts from former staff members who left the hospital alive only fueled these macabre theories. Many spoke of bodies being removed in the dead of night, of procedures conducted without any auxiliary staff present, and of doctors doing everything in their power to conceal the traces of the missing patients. Perhaps these patients never left the hospital because the hospital never intended for them to leave. With each new disappearance, the notion grew that more than just medical experiments were being conducted in that place. There was a dark mystery that extended far beyond anything anyone could imagine. Over time, the disappearances of the patients were followed by another mystery. The doctors themselves began to vanish. At first, it didn't raise much suspicion. Some believed that after years of working in such a grim, controversial environment, the doctors simply left the town, fleeing the growing pressure and rumors surrounding the hospital. But the disappearances were more sinister than they appeared. There were no warnings, no resignation letters, not even whispers of new jobs or life changes. They simply vanished. As the number of missing doctors grew, the remaining nurses and staff began to fear for their own lives. Some swore they had seen doctors entering restricted wards of the hospital, never to emerge again. Others reported hearing muffled screams and the sound of doors being locked deep within the building. Those who tried to investigate further were quickly silenced or disappeared themselves, adding yet another layer of terror to the ever-growing mystery. The disappearance of the doctors fueled the theory that something much darker was behind the hospital's operations. Did they know too much? Were they involved in something so macabre that they couldn't simply walk away? Or perhaps they were victims of the very evil they had helped nurture within that place. The answers to these questions never came. What remained were the whispers of a terrified town and the ruins of a hospital that seemed more alive with the secrets it guarded than ever before. Although many stories circulated about the horrors inside the hospital, there was always a part that seemed to be left out, as if no one dared to tell the full truth. Deep within the building, far from the curious eyes of explorers, there was a ward never mentioned on any maps or in official records. Most people didn't even know of its existence, except for those who ventured further than anyone had before. This ward, it seemed, was the dark heart of the hospital, the place where the most disturbing secrets were buried. According to rumors, it was there that the most brutal experiments were conducted, far beyond the reach of any ethical oversight. But it wasn't just medical experiments. Something far more sinister was at play. A chilling theory began to spread among the town's residents. What if the hospital was merely a front for something much bigger? A network of secret practices funded by those who sought to test the boundaries of life and death? Some even spoke of dark pacts made with forces that transcended the material world. This story was never confirmed, but the mere idea that the hospital served a darker purpose than healing left the town shrouded in fear and superstition. Investigations were silenced, and anyone who tried to dig deeper into the mystery was quickly discouraged or disappeared without a trace. Whatever lay within that secret ward was buried along with the doctors and patients who entered and never left. And perhaps it was better that those secrets remained hidden forever. Over the years, as the abandoned hospital's notoriety grew, it became a coveted destination for ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. The location was perfect for those seeking unexplainable phenomena. Stories of wandering spirits, disappearances, and supernatural events multiplied with every visit. The first to arrive were small local groups, curious about the rumors their own neighbors had spread. Armed with low-quality cameras, voice recorders, and improvised devices, they believed they could capture concrete evidence of the afterlife. The early expeditions were plagued by inexplicable technical failures. Batteries drained suddenly, equipment stopped working, and, most unsettling, voices appeared in recordings, voices that belonged to no one present. In one of his investigations, a ghost hunter recorded a whisper that repeated his name several times, barely audible at first, until it grew into a deafening scream. He abandoned the investigation that night and swore never to return. As more ghost hunters heard about the hospital, its reputation grew internationally. Soon, professional investigative teams began arriving, bringing with them cutting-edge technology to capture evidence of the supernatural. But the more advanced the equipment, the more terrifying the results. Voices and faces appeared in videos and recordings, confirming that the hospital was inhabited by something beyond human comprehension. However, the more the hospital was explored, the stronger the sense of danger became, and the vengeful entity seemed to intensify its efforts to keep the mystery buried. The phenomena recorded by ghost hunters became increasingly evident and disturbing over time. Equipment designed to capture temperature variations showed sudden, inexplicable drops at certain points within the hospital, always accompanied by an overwhelming sense of fear. Devices that detected electromagnetic fields registered extreme spikes in areas where no energy sources should have been present. But the most terrifying were the voice recordings. In nearly every recording session, voices emerged from nowhere, whispering incomplete phrases or words filled with desperation. In one of the most notorious investigations, a team of investigators captured the sound of footsteps, seemingly following them down the hallways. The audio recording revealed something even more chilling, a distant guttural voice repeating the word "leave" multiple times as they walked. Despite this mounting evidence, the hospital seemed to resist any attempt at clarification. Answers never came fully, as if something or someone within the building was manipulating the investigations, offering only fragments of a dark puzzle. In addition to the audio recordings, there were sightings of ghostly apparitions. White, floating figures captured by night vision cameras seemed to pass through walls and vanish into thin air. In one such recording, a shadowy figure appeared to point toward a specific area of the hospital. But when the investigators tried to follow the lead, they were met with an overwhelming wave of cold, and soon after, all their equipment failed. None of the investigators were able to return to that area, and the vengeful entity seemed more active than ever, frustrating any attempt to uncover its secrets. As more paranormal evidence emerged, interest in the abandoned hospital skyrocketed. What had once been merely an urban legend became a magnet for curious visitors from all over, ranging from paranormal investigators to YouTubers eager to capture the most terrifying footage. The hospital's mystery grew more intriguing with every new video or story shared on social media. The small, forgotten town began receiving a steady stream of visitors, all seeking answers to what really transpired within the hospital's haunted walls. Television shows specializing in supernatural phenomena started booking shoots at the location. With each new episode filmed, more people became captivated, and the hospital quickly became an icon among those fascinated by the inexplicable. However, what these shows managed to capture only scratched the surface of the dark secrets hidden within. Despite the growing interest, few dared to delve deep enough to challenge the vengeful entity that guarded the hospital. It was as if the place itself was luring people in while simultaneously preventing any true discovery. With the increased attention, the dangers also became more apparent. Those brave enough to spend extended periods in the hospital reported devastating psychological effects. Constant nightmares, the sensation of being followed or watched, and a growing sense of paranoia were common among those who attempted to uncover the mysteries. Even the most seasoned ghost hunters admitted that there was something within the hospital that went beyond mere paranormal phenomena. Something alive, aware, and fiercely determined to protect its secrets at all costs. Visits to the hospital didn't just leave behind terrifying memories. They also had deep psychological consequences for those who ventured beyond the limits of the acceptable. Many explorers who escaped without physical harm reported in the following weeks a constant feeling of oppression. It was as if the hospital refused to let them go, as though a part of their souls remained trapped inside. Some claimed that even at home, they felt watched, as if the vengeful entity had marked them in some way. The most common reports included recurring nightmares. Those who had ventured into the depths of the hospital described dreams where the corridors seemed to stretch on forever, with something or someone always chasing them. Others said that after their visits, they began hearing whispers when they were alone at home, as if the screams from the hospital still haunted them. The line between the real world and the supernatural became increasingly blurred for these individuals, and many ended up seeking professional help to cope with their trauma. For some, the effects were even more devastating. Paranoia took hold of their lives irreversibly, with any shadow or unfamiliar sound causing their hearts to race. Some developed a fear of the dark, unable to turn off the lights or feel safe in their own homes. The hospital wasn't just a source of mystery, it became a breaking point for the sanity of many. The vengeful entity, it seemed, didn't allow anyone to escape unscathed. Even those who thought they had physically escaped were trapped within their own minds. After years of speculation and unsolved mysteries, a group of paranormal investigators decided to delve deeper than anyone had before. Determined to uncover the truth of what really happened inside the hospital, they were prepared to face the vengeful entity head-on if necessary. Armed with the best technology available and equipped with knowledge from previous reports, they entered the hospital with a carefully crafted plan. Their goal wasn't just to capture more evidence, but to finally reveal the truth that had long resisted discovery. Unlike previous visits, this group chose to explore areas that others had avoided, particularly the lower floors and basements, where it was rumored the darkest secrets were kept. As they ventured deeper, the signs that they were being watched grew stronger. Footsteps echoed behind them, disturbing whispers became clearer, and at times they felt the icy touch of unseen hands. Yet, they pressed on, convinced they were close to uncovering what so many had tried and failed to reveal. When they reached a locked room on the hospital's lowest levels, the tension reached its peak. Their cameras caught shadows shifting on the walls, and their flashlights flickered uncontrollably. Upon forcing open the door, they found something that would change the entire course of their investigation. But before they could fully document what was inside the room, the entity manifested with a violence none of them had ever experienced. What they discovered inside almost revealed everything. But the events that followed ensured the hospital's secrets remained buried. After the confrontation in the locked room, the group of investigators became obsessed with understanding the origins of the vengeful entity that had confronted them. With each recording they analyzed, more questions arose. What was this force that seemed determined to protect the hospital at all costs? Why did it manifest such rage? The stories they heard and the footage they captured began to paint a disturbing picture. The entity was not merely a restless spirit, but the embodiment of all the pain and trauma accumulated within the hospital's walls. In their research, they discovered that the entity might have once been one of the doctors responsible for the horrific experiments, a person trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead due to their own actions. Some old records mentioned a doctor who had become obsessed with mastering life and death, seeking results that were beyond human comprehension. With each patient who disappeared, his sanity deteriorated until he ultimately became a victim of his own twisted pursuit. The investigators also noticed that the entity's activity intensified when anyone approached certain areas of the hospital, particularly those where the most brutal procedures had occurred. It was as if, in its vengeful form, the entity was attempting to guard the secrets still buried within, keeping the curious away. Each new clue revealed a part of the story, but also brought more questions about how the entity was tied to the hospital and its dark past. The realization that the entity might have had a personal identity only heightened the urgency to uncover the truth. With the new understanding of the entity, the group of investigators felt they were closer than ever to uncovering the hospital's hidden secrets. Armed with this knowledge, they prepared for another expedition, focusing on the darkest, most abandoned areas that had yet to be fully explored. The tension was palpable, but the promise of discovering the truth drove them forward. As they descended into the basement, the atmosphere became more oppressive, and the darkness seemed to take on a life of its own. In a room that appeared to be an old treatment center, they found stacks of ancient files piled on a table. What they discovered was more than just patient records. They were reports on procedures, horrifying and completely inhumane experiments. The pages detailed human experimentation, surgeries, and treatments that defied all ethical boundaries. However, the most disturbing part was the names listed in the documents. Many belonged to people who had mysteriously disappeared. It seemed the hospital had transformed into a laboratory for obscure and grotesque medical practices. As they examined the documents, the atmosphere in the room shifted drastically. A bone-chilling cold filled the space, and the vengeful entity began to manifest more aggressively. The investigators felt surrounded, as if the darkness itself was alive and trying to force them out. Whatever they had uncovered seemed to have triggered an even stronger defense from the entity. Amidst the chaos, some of the cameras captured flashes of light and shadows revealing indistinct figures behind them, as if the spirits of the patients were making themselves known, crying out for justice. The discovery of the files and the entity's attack heightened the group's sense of urgency. They realized that leaving wasn't enough. They needed to share this truth with the world before the hospital, and everything it represented was lost forever. But the entity wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. After the intense discovery in the hospital's basement, the investigators were determined to share their findings, but they had no idea the devastating consequences that awaited them. As they tried to leave, the vengeful entity intensified its attacks. Chaos ensued. Doors slammed shut, lights flickered, and deafening screams echoed through the walls. Despair overwhelmed everyone. Some members of the group began losing their grip on reality, struggling to distinguish between what was real and what were hallucinations, driven by the entity's influence and the oppressive atmosphere. As they scrambled to escape, the group found themselves divided. Those who were most traumatized, unable to cope with the terror, ran off in different directions, while others tried to remain calm and find an exit. But the doors that had been open earlier now seemed sealed, as if the hospital itself was deciding who could leave and who had to stay. Panic set in, and the entity's power seemed to grow stronger, feeding off their fear and making it even more dangerous. Finding a way out of the hospital became a labyrinthine ordeal, and when they finally located a door leading outside, freedom was not what awaited them. Upon returning to town, most of them were unrecognizable. Haunted expressions and vacant stares betrayed the terror they had endured. The experience had marked them permanently. Some abandoned their normal lives, others developed severe mental and physical issues, and many began reporting supernatural occurrences that followed them outside the hospital. Those who managed to share their discoveries soon realized they were not welcome. The town, already burdened by its own ghostly rumors, was now gripped by fear that the hospital's secrets might finally be exposed. Instead of support, the investigators faced distrust and even hostility. The hospital remained a place of legend and mystery, while the investigators became mere shadows of their former selves, carrying the weight of a secret few would dare believe. What happened in the depths of the hospital would never be fully understood, but the vengeful entity would continue to guard its secrets, eternal and unyielding. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and if you can, support us with a small coffee through the link in the pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to keep bringing you these thrilling stories. Oh, and if you enjoyed this video, here's another story up top that will move you even more. Click and find out what happens next. You won't want to miss it.